James, in his letter, encourages us, those who read that letter, to show no favoritism. The gospel of Christ is for all, for rich and for poor. Not just for those who can afford to pay for it, but for all. Jesus showed in his ministry that equality as he went through the region of Palestine and encountered many different people. Greeks, meaning people from other parts of the Roman Empire. People whose first language was Greek and not Aramaic or Hebrew as they spoke locally. Does it strike you as strange or even somewhat insulting the way that Jesus spoke to this woman? The woman came to him seeking help. Help for her daughter that she believed was struck by a demon, troubled by that demon for a long time. She wanted her girl to be healed. She begged Jesus to come and lay his hands on her daughter. What did Jesus say? First, let the children eat all they want. For it is not right to take the children's bread and toss it to the dogs. What's he talking about? Who are the children? The children are the people of Israel, his people. And who are the dogs? I suspect, though it's not written into this account, that Jesus had already spent a little while talking with this woman. And I suspect that they had got a good relationship going. They've been able to talk and even to joke and to come to an understanding about the relationship between their two peoples and the way that they could get on themselves together. And I suspect that when Jesus talked about the dogs, she knew very well these were not his own words, but the words of some of his fellow Israelites. Maybe the Pharisees, maybe other people who showed great prejudice against foreigners, against people who were not Jews. They were dogs, and they did speak of them as such. And of course Jesus wouldn't have done that, except in a very clear way, knowing that the woman he was talking to understood precisely what he was saying, that he was talking the talk of others, tongue-in-cheek, we might say, or with a wink of an eye. It's not right, is it? You understand. I shouldn't be doing this. I shouldn't be going to someone else's house outside the people of Israel, the Jews. You know what they might say? Already this woman has come to know Jesus. She's known him from repute. She has heard about the things that he has done, and she believes. And she has an answer. Yes, she says. But even the dogs are allowed to pick up the crumbs under the children's table. They're on the same wavelength. They've got their talk going very well. And through this, Jesus understands and knows that this is a woman of faith. She believes that he can do this. She believes that God, through Jesus, will heal her daughter. She is allowed to go away in that faith, certain of what she's going to find in the house. How often have we been guilty, I wonder, of prejudice or of discriminating between one and another? How difficult it is for us to come to terms with ourselves when we find ourselves doing that, either consciously or unconsciously. That passage from James that we read about favouritism and not showing favouritism, I remember very well having that passage read at a Bible study one evening, not long after I had arrived to be the minister of a church in a village in Bangladesh. I arrived in the village of Rottenpur just a couple of weeks before, I think, and it was their practice, their custom, every night to go around different people's homes, as often as they could anyway, and have a Bible study. The young people of the village would gather outside the house, and they would all sit around with their Bibles and talk about the Bible. They'd chosen this passage. You come before poor people, and you're wearing gold rings. And I looked at my hand, and I was wearing a gold ring. They already knew me. They knew that I came from a rich country, but they knew that I had come to be with them, and I think trusted me by that time. I'd already been in Bangladesh for 2 years before. I'd been sent to this village by the bishop, a village that he didn't regard very highly. So perhaps he'd sent me there as punishment. It was 200 miles away from Dhaka, the big city. A whole day's journey if I wanted to get there. But I wasn't discouraged. And though my Bengali had been a bit poor before, the first 2 years I was speaking in English to expatriate congregations and Anglo-Indians in Dhaka, as people of mixed race, most of whom desperately wanted to get out of the Indian subcontinent and go and live in England, which they regarded as their true home. And I'd also been trying very hard to speak in Bengali in the Bengali congregation in Dhaka. Though that was something of a trial, not so much for me, but for those who were listening. Here I was in a village where very few people could speak a word of English. In fact, nobody was fluent in English, and I had to speak their language. Believe me, I did it. Those of you who know that I've been here for a long time and I haven't mastered Chinese may think that's strange. I was young then, and it does make a difference. About showing favouritism. There we were having our Bible study. One of the young men noticed, as he looked around, there were some of the women sitting in the circle didn't have their heads covered, and for some reason he cottoned on to this verse that said that you should not approach God or worship unless women should not, matter for men, but women should not worship and approach God unless they had their heads covered. And he looked up and saw this. I didn't have time to stop him. He said, I noticed there are some of you. Immediately they grabbed the end of each other's saris, loose end, put it over their heads so that he was happy. This was a boy of about 16 years old, telling his elders how to dress in church. No favoritism was being shown by him. I did have a word with him afterwards and say, perhaps that matter of dress is not quite so important as maybe it was for St. Paul in his day and in his cultural surroundings. I did have cause to question the wealth that I brought with me to the village. After I'd been there about 6 months, one of the men commented on my camera. In those days we had film cameras. It had a big zoom lens and seemed somewhat ostentatious to him. He said, we're a bit worried about your camera. Do you think if you didn't show it around quite so much, so I was taking lots of pictures, I still have them, I've still got them in my collection. And then I discovered that because they'd been concerned about some of the things that we had brought with us, every night, 2 or 3 of the men of the village formed kind of patrol near our house, without asking us, without even telling us what was going on. Every night we discovered we were being protected by the Christians in the village. It felt safe, although there had been some trouble a couple of years earlier between the two communities, Christian and Muslim. But at that time, everything seemed peaceful. But this did cause me to think about the possessions that I had. And there I was in a village with 2,000 people, none of whose homes had electricity, no one had running water, and for none of us was there a telephone. We had to go 15 miles, more than 25 kilometers to the nearest town if we wanted to telephone anyone. So that was our communication with the outside world. Things were different. No phones, no electricity, no running water. And we were in this village with our wealth. It's the kind of situation where you can start to feel the guilt of the Western rich world when it's up against the poverty of what was then surely the poorest country in the world. It was not long after the Bangladesh War of Independence, when they got their freedom from the oppressive government in Pakistan. They had been helped by Indira Gandhi and the Indian army. The place where we were living was just next to the border and very close to where Sheikh Mujibur Rahman had entered the country and declared the new nation. That had been about 5 years before. That time had been followed by 4 years of famine. First, because they hadn't planted while there was a war going on, but then because of flood and drought. In Bangladesh, either way, too much or too little water, and the rice fails. It was, at that time, definitely the poorest nation in the world. I was in the village for just over 2 years before returning to England and then being sent as a missionary to Africa and Zambia. But at the end of that time, as I was leaving the village, they had a big farewell party. They gave me this cross. Difficult to receive, because I knew that they had spent a lot of money to buy a silver cross and chain. And I reflected on it and recognized we had something valuable between us. I think the statement that they were making was, don't think of us as poor. We're as rich as you in the Spirit. We're as rich as you in the life of the one who gave his life on the cross for us. God does not show favoritism, either to poor or to rich. Jesus is Lord for all and Lord of all. The world today seems to be very much favouring the rich. Even in a rich country, with the elections coming on very soon, Republican and Democrat conventions having taken place, the rich people are in control, and the poor are pushed aside. The Republicans met in Tampa in Florida, barriers were put up across the town, because Tampa has the highest number of homeless people in any town in America. For those nights when the Republican Party was meeting, they were not to tarnish the image of Florida. They were not to be found sleeping on the park benches where they usually went. The rich politicians, their cohorts, were allowed to sleep peacefully in their hotels during that time. A country where 1/5 of the population lives below the poverty line, albeit the poverty line that they have set themselves, but where many of those people today are homeless. The encounter between rich and poor does not only take place when someone from a rich country goes to a poor country. The encounter is often confronting us here, where we are. It's not easy for poor people in Taiwan, although there's a much safer culture here when it's working. Perhaps it doesn't always. The extended family, which is still important, still has much to offer and much to say to the rest of the world. Where a family has success, that success is shared among its members and beyond. Those of us who come from other parts of the world find ourselves perhaps as the poorer partners. We're often receiving tremendous hospitality. And that's certainly a credit to the people of Taiwan. A man from China visited recently. The frame of his glasses got broken. He was desperate because he really needed them. He was actually going to see the president later in the week, and he went into a shop. They were so kind to him. He actually wrote about it in his blog. He told the world about how kind opticians in Taiwan had been to him. Not one, because the first one, not only one, the first one was able to offer him a little bit of help, though he couldn't repair it in the time available. He gave him a set of contact lenses to see him through while he was here. The second one he went to said, "Oh, we can do it, we'll give it to you tomorrow, but just for now, we'll give you this spare pair. It may be a small thing, but it made a very big impression." I think James is talking about those kind of small deeds as well as great deeds. And he's talking about all God's people together. I shan't forget, I never do, every time I wear it, I shan't forget that gift of that community in Bangladesh and what it means and symbolises. It symbolises something that we all share, something that we all have available to us in common to share. And that is the love of God in Christ Jesus. The love which brings us together, which allows us to give and to receive of the riches God gives to us. A love which also challenges us to think about whether we are doing our part to the full in sharing those riches. So often we have people here from countries that are in danger of going under the sea. Tuvalu, from Kiribati, it brings awareness to a wider community of the needs of the world. We have people from richer countries too, and gain through them the same awareness. Or at least countries not necessarily richer, but with more opportunities to develop their wealth and to live in peace for longer. We are constantly challenged by the needs of the world and how to bring into this context of this wonderful global community that we have in a small fellowship, how to bring this context together with the context of the world. what we should be doing to share the love of Christ, not just in those small ways, but in the greater ways, really having our part to play in changing the world, challenging the principalities and powers that Paul spoke of in his letter to the Ephesians, bringing with God judgment upon the corruption of this world today, but also showing God's gifts to all, from the wide variety and riches that we experience from all over the world. As we hear this message today, may we also hear God's challenge to us as individuals in our lives now and in what we plan to do with our lives in the future. Our challenge to live according to the love of Christ for all God's people.